Hello, welcome to Science Month. This month we are kicking off Science Sundays, which is a project I have wanted to do for ages. So if you want more information on what Science Sundays is going to be, I will put a link in the card above because I made a trailer. Yes, we're getting fancy. This video is going to be all about how I work in a lab and manage cold urticaria alongside that. If you're new here, hi, I'm Max. I have a bachelor's and a master's in pharmacology, I live with chronic pain, and I'm also allergic to cold. So, let's get into it. In my lab, there's a lot of working with ice. Antibodies are stored in the freezer at -20 degrees C and then stored on ice on the bench prior to use. So, how do I deal with this? Let's go through this step by step. Different labs will have different procedures and different regulations of what you can and can't touch with gloves on. Door handles are almost always a no, simply because contamination, and you don't want to have something on your glove, touch a door handle which someone is then going to touch without the glove on, and then they could have who knows what on their hands. So often I open the freezer door with an ungloved hand. I can't remember which video I mentioned this in, but wet cold is pretty much always worse than dry cold. I don't make the rules. Maybe I do. At this point, the door is now open. Cleaned nitrile gloves then go on. I can then rummage around in the freezer and look for my properly labelled antibody. Generally I know exactly where they are, so I don't actually have to rummage that much. They're usually in a labelled box exactly where I left them. But sometimes other people might go rummaging through the freezer because they don't necessarily know what they're looking for or where it is. So sometimes things get moved, it happens. Once I found my antibody, it goes straight in the ice, and then I can hold the ice bucket, which is usually polystyrene, in my hand, and that's generally not that cold, it's well insulated, and I can take a glove off and shut the freezer. When storing the antibody on ice, go to the ice machine. A lot of places use polystyrene boxes to package things that need to be stored on ice, so they will keep nice and cold, and a lot of labs keep those around to reuse for storing things on ice. Science is quite a wasteful industry sometimes, so we recycle when we can. It's unwise to dunk the polystyrene box straight into the ice machine because there's all sorts of contamination risk. You don't know what's been in that box, and they generally don't get autoclaved. You don't want to contaminate the ice and ruin it for everybody, as well as break the box. So find the scoop. If the scoop is lost or buried under the ice, find a clean cup, preferably one, maybe a glass beaker. A glass beaker is my go-to, especially if it has been autoclaved. So it's very low contamination risk and scoop fast. You can always put some clean gloves on to help you if you find wet cold to be worse than dry cold. So now let's talk handling these antibodies. It's again unwise to pull your hand into the sleeve of your lab coat and hold the antibody like that. If it leaks or spills, that's going to drip right down your arm, and you don't want that antibody on your skin. It's also a really good way to fumble the tube and drop hundreds of pounds worth of antibody all over the floor. They are way too expensive to do that. So instead, put on your natural gloves and hold it by the lid. This is generally the warmest part of the tube, and you're less likely to transfer the heat from your hand into the antibody that's frozen in the bottom. This way you're not going to degrade the antibody, and it's going to be in the best condition it can be for use in your experiments. Cold rooms. Now, I have been in my fair share of cold rooms. Yes, they cause me problems, but sometimes you just have to. Sometimes it's the only way for the research to get done. Open the door, gloves off. Then put your gloves on and you're ready to go in. Generally, if you're wearing all of the PPE that you should be wearing, so lab coats, goggles, covered head to toe, you are going to be kept quite warm. It's not like you're going to have loads of bare skin exposed to the cold room, so it might just be your face. When I'm in a cold room, I avoid touching anything metal because that gets extra cold. That really does hold on to the cold, and you are going to get whatever you've leaned on, like a desk-shaped welt on your arm or your hand, and you just don't need to lean on it, and you never really know how stable something is anyway, and you don't want to knock loads of machinery on the floor, so just don't lean on stuff. Saying that, with chronic pain sometimes it can't be helped, so I try to grab the wall or just aim for something that isn't metal. I won't put my hand on a metal bench, I won't touch the metal beams on the rollers. Metal just will be cold, so avoid. Depending on the lab and how your cold urticaria affects you, you can wear your VOG mask, especially if you're going to be in there a while. I personally don't, because there's a pretty decent contamination risk. You don't really want to wear anything porous because then you can take contamination out with you. So I probably wouldn't. I will just take the consequences of cold exposure and make sure that I have got my inhaler with me, although it doesn't work for pre-medication. I will put a link in the card above. I make sure before I go in the cold room that I know exactly what I'm doing before I go in there, so I'm not standing there thinking of what I need to do next. I go in with a plan. That will just keep the exposure time as low as possible. Gloves come off to shut and bolt the door behind me when I'm finished. When doing anything that involves working on ice, so preparing cell samples for lysis, make sure to keep my nitrile gloves on, which you're supposed to do anyway, but make sure that they are on. If I'm using a plate, I hold it from the edges and I just try to make as little contact with the ice as possible. Tools that need to be on ice, they just will be cold, you just have to make peace with that. That's just how it is. Gotta medicate properly beforehand, so that's just taking my antihistamines every day in the morning, as always. Some instruments like centrifuges and plate readers, they need to be ice cold, like they need to be colder than cold. A lot of the time the temperature is internal, so when you're handling the machine, pressing all the buttons, loading in the samples, all of that lovely stuff, that cold isn't going to affect you because it's not on the surface, it's not external, it's just inside the machine. Just make sure that you keep your clean nitrile gloves on, just in case. You also won't be contaminating it for anybody else, or contaminating yourself. Again, avoid touching metal parts if you can, and hold all of your tubes by the lids. Don't do this with a plate because you'll just take the lid off. I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm just kind of going to leave it there. That's how I work in my lab with cold urticaria. This will differ from person to person and lab to lab. That's kind of the basics of it, and that's how I go about doing it. Exposure to cold, especially in a lab situation, will happen, but there are things you can do to lessen the effects of it. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment in with any way you avoid cold urticaria in your job. Or if you have anything to add, let me know in the comments. Subscribe to my channel and click on the little bell icon so you get notified every single time I post a video. Videos go up every Saturday at 6 PM UK time, with at least one bonus video every single month, apart from this month, in which it is Science Month. I'm bringing out Science Sundays, so for this month only you're going to get a science themed video every Sunday, as well as the original Saturday videos. See ya!